Question is, if we meet an atheist or an agnostic or a person who at least wants to give the consideration to the fact that there is a higher principle, some supreme element, they may not say God, but I would accept that there has to be some profound element or higher principle, but that there's no evidence that that this person whose name is Muhammad is a prophet of God. And so what miracle does the Quran has that seems to indicate that he was a prophet? The answer would be the Quran itself. Other prophets were given a specific miracle to show the people. Allah gave to the Prophet ﷺ a composite scripture. And in that composite scripture, if a person takes the time to read, they will find 40 or 50 phenomena that the Quran speaks about that the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, could not himself have known. I'll give you 2 or 3. The Quran says, وَالشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا مُسْتَقَرٍ لَهَا. The sun and the moon each follow a law which they do not go outside of. Now, 1424 years ago, was that law known? Was it known 1424 years ago? Was it known? It didn't say, it says the moon and the sun. Now, we now know that the moon goes around the earth, doesn't it, in its own orbit, isn't it? And we also know that the earth goes around the sun in its own orbit. Now, the Quran says, وَالشَّمْسِ وَالْقَمَرِ, suggesting that the sun doesn't move out of its orbit. So that means the Quran is saying that the sun is in an orbit. Could the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, have known that the sun has its own orbit, its own law? He could not have known that. Could he have also known that that the earth is positioned in such a way as to make it appear that also that the sun is stationary? No. Second thing, could the Prophet ﷺ have known that the moon is also in its own orbit around the earth as the earth is moving around the sun? Could he have known that? No, he couldn't have. The Quran said that. Another statement the Quran says, and verily we created every single thing from water. Now science, biology, has established clearly that every living element of existence has come from water. Part of what's inside water is called what? Carbon, isn't it? Isn't it? Carbon. The Quran says, and we created every living thing from water. Now we know that all the gases that we find in the universe and inside the human beings, inside fossils inside the earth, so from the inside the earth to what's on the earth to what's outside of the earth is dependent upon and made from water. The Quran said that. Could the Prophet have known that? No. The Quran says, وَخَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ عَلَقٍ, and we created the human being from a hanging clot. And alaq means not suspended, but clinging and hanging. Now, the embryologist will tell us clearly now that when the sperm penetrates the egg then embeds itself into what? The uterus. And from embedding itself in the uterus, it creates what? A cluster, a clot, then it hangs. From there, the creation of the human being starts, and that hanging, that string that hangs becomes what for the human being? The umbilical cord, isn't it? That connects it to the brain, and that the brain is the first part of the human being that is fashioned, isn't it? So the Quran said, وَخَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ عَلَقٍ. Then the Quran goes on further to teach the 7 stages of the embryo in the womb until it comes fully out. Could the Prophet have known that? He could not have. But the Quran has stated that clearly. Did he have a stethoscope? Did he have a way to look up inside? Could he have known that? No, he didn't know that. The Quran also says in the Surah Rahman that Allah, the Creator, has created the oceans, large bodies of water, one sweet, palatable to the taste, and the other salty and bitter. What are those 2 bodies of water? Oceans and rivers, isn't it? And between them, he has put what is called barzakh, a barrier which they do not cross. What does that mean? It means that when the oceans meet the rivers, the ocean does not overcome the river, and the rivers do not enter the ocean so that the oceans absorb the rivers. It doesn't happen. Where oceans and rivers meet, does the ocean take over the river? It doesn't, although the ocean might be 5 times, 6 times, 8 times, 10 times larger than a river. And you know, if you took 2 bodies of water and you put a funnel in between them, what would happen? The larger body would absorb the smaller body, wouldn't they? But in the case of the ocean and the river, it doesn't happen because Allah said he put a barzakh. So they do not overcome each other. And one of our, Jacques Cousteau, who passed away now, he was a marine biologist. He was able to film under the ocean where the rivers meet the ocean, and the river meets the ocean, and the ocean meets the river, and they go back. They meet and they go back. So therefore the rivers return back to itself and the ocean returns back to itself, and they do not overcome each other. How did the Prophet know that? We could name many phenomena in the Quran that the Quran has stated 1424 years ago as a miracle. Not that the Quran is a book of science. It is not. It is a book proving that Muhammad is a prophet of God, because God has said things in it that Muhammad could not have known to prove who he was.